Welcome to Resilient Inspirations. Around here, we believe every story carries a lesson and every question opens a new door. Think of this as friends talking over coffee, exploring ideas together. So let's get started, and I'll pass the mic to the conversation.
You know, during the Industrial Revolution, the definitive sound of work was the factory whistle. It was loud, it was completely unambiguous, and most importantly, when it blew at the end of the day, work was entirely physically over. You just went home. Today, though, the defining sound of work is the smartphone notification. It's just this gentle, almost polite little ping. Welcome to the debate.
Right. But unlike the factory whistle, that ping follows you home. I mean, it follows you to the dinner table, it follows you to bed, and increasingly, it follows you across international borders.
Yeah, it really is wild to think about the sheer scale of this shift. I mean, we are tracking, 18.5 million American digital nomads alone right now?
Mm-hmm.
And tens of millions more globally. They are fundamentally reshaping the geography of labor. But, you know, when I look at those perfectly curated Instagram photos of laptops on tropical beaches, I have to wonder, is this an empowering evolution of work? Does it actually distribute economic opportunity across borders? Or is it a fundamentally exploitative system that exacts this hidden toxic connectivity tax on human cognition and local host communities?
It's a vital question. Because if you look past that polished social media aesthetic, you know, the coconuts and the sunsets, you start to see a very rigid structural reality beneath it all.
Right. And we definitely approach this from two very different vantage points. I look at the data and I see a movement that is maturing into what's being called nomadism. And when this lifestyle is supported by proper asynchronous communication systems and clear visa policies, I see it as a profound net positive, one that redistributes global wealth and offers genuine human autonomy.
Yeah, well, my read of the situation is much darker. I think this lifestyle is built on a myth of absolute freedom that really just masks a severe psychological connectivity tax. It relies on, frankly, an unethical foundation of privileged mobility. You have professionals from wealthy nations exploiting global tax loopholes, driving up local housing costs, and suffering from systemic digital burnout in the process.
Okay, well, if that notification ping is following us across borders, we have to ask who is actually paying the toll for that connectivity. You've studied the industrial and organizational psychology here. What is the actual biological reality of this lifestyle?
The toll is largely neurological. What we are really talking about here is a state of continuous partial attention. For a digital nomad, the very technology that grants them geographic freedom completely dissolves the boundaries between work, leisure, and personal time.
Right. From a neuropsychological perspective, every single notification triggers the amygdala. That is the brain's alarm center. It releases cortisol and adrenaline, so you are essentially living in a state of chronic low-grade fight or flight. We see this manifesting as telepressure, which is the overwhelming, almost compulsive urge to respond instantly to digital communications. But let me ask you this. Is that telepressure unique to a digital nomad in Bali? Or is that just a reality for, any modern knowledge worker sitting in a cubicle in Chicago?
It is uniquely exacerbated for the nomad.
How so?
Well, because they are entirely dependent on that digital tether for their professional survival across time zones. They aren't in the office to show their face, so they have to show their green dot on Slack. And there is a measurable cost to this fragmented attention. The brain does not multitask. It task switches. Research shows it takes the human brain anywhere from 8 to 25 minutes to fully refocus after a single interruption.
Because the brain has to essentially reload the context of whatever complex task you were doing before the ping.
Your cognition are still lingering on that email you just answered while you are trying to, say, write code or draft a proposal. And ironically, the current corporate structure actually punishes the best workers for this. There's this documented phenomenon called the competence tax.
Wait, the competence tax? I want to dig into that because I think anyone working remotely has felt this on some level. How does being highly competent actually punish you in a remote setting?
Think about it from a manager's perspective. When everyone was in a physical bullpen, a manager could look around, see who was buried in paperwork, and hand a new assignment to someone who looked free. In a remote, asynchronous environment, that visibility is just gone.
True.
The manager just needs a problem solved quickly. So who do they message? The person who responds the fastest and always gets the job done.
Ah,
Right, so highly reliable remote workers are rewarded with endless, fragmented requests. They get swamped, their attention is completely shattered by 100 tiny favors, and they eventually plateau in their careers because they are mistaking quick responsiveness for actual deep value work. They just burn out.
the competence tax. That is a brilliant way to frame it. The reward for digging a great ditch is a bigger shovel.
Exactly.
But while I don't deny the reality of digital burnout, I look at this the way historians look at the early industrial revolution. When we first moved from farms into factories, the working conditions were atrocious. Why? Because the tools had simply outpaced the rules. The solution wasn't to burn down the factories. It was to implement labor laws, establish the weekend, regulate working hours. I would argue that digital burnout isn't an inherent fatal flaw of nomadism. It's just a failure of organizational design.
A failure of design that is currently the industry standard, though.
But the standard is shifting right now. We are seeing a massive rise in right to disconnect policies. Forward-thinking organizations are moving away from synchronous live communication toward asynchronous models. If a team establishes clear response time roles, say, urgent matters go through a specific page or app, while general Slack inquiries have a formal 24 to 48 hour response window, you entirely eliminate that telepressure.
Yeah, but you are assuming the individual has the leverage to enforce those boundaries with their employer or their clients.
It's becoming a structural expectation. You implement digital minimalism. You audit your notifications so the amygdala isn't firing all day. You set core overlap hours, maybe just 2 to 4 hours a day of mandatory overlap for live collaboration, protecting the rest of your day for uninterrupted deep work. When a nomad actually exercises these systems, they completely mitigate that neurological tax.
Let me push back on that. You are arguing that highly structured systems, rigid notification audits, and strict time blocking can save the nomad from burnout.
Yes,
Let's assume you're right. Let's assume an individual can perfectly manage their cognitive load. Do you see the inherent contradiction there? These complex digital systems and the absolute requirement to micromanage your own attention completely contradict the fundamental premise of the lifestyle. The promise sold to these workers was absolute freedom.
well, absolute freedom is just a marketing slogan designed to sell online courses. What nomadism actually offers in practice is autonomy over your environment.
But they don't even have autonomy over their environment. They are bound by what I call the infrastructure tether. Nomads sell the dream of wandering the globe, but they are actually on an invisible leash. They aren't exploring the untouched wilderness. They are anxiously hunting for a cafe with a stable fiber optic router, because if they drop their Zoom call with New York, they lose their income.
I mean,
They have just traded a gray cubicle for a tropical one. What this creates is a new form of urban nomadism. They merely relocate the corporate grind to a handful of highly saturated international hubs: Lisbon, Medellin, Chiang Mai, Bali. They are tethered to infrastructure, restricted by their privileged mobility, leaving the rest of the world completely invisible to the global knowledge economy.
okay, I would normally agree with that assessment of the infrastructure tether, but hardware innovations are rapidly dissolving that leash. We aren't relying on cafe Wi-Fi anymore. Look at the Starlink Mini.
The portable satellite dish?
Yes, we are talking about a piece of hardware that fits in a standard backpack. It delivers broadband speeds of 75 to 240 megabits per second, entirely independent of local cell towers or fiber networks. It communicates directly with low Earth orbit satellite.
But does it actually hold up to professional enterprise-level demands? I mean, it's one thing to check email. It's another to run a virtual private network and host high-definition video architectures.
It absolutely holds up. It supports smooth, high-definition video calls and heavy data transfers from virtually anywhere on the planet with a clear view of the sky. This technology fundamentally changes the map. It allows nomads to push far past those saturated urban hubs you mentioned, deep into rural and historically underdeveloped regions. And regarding the burden of operating across multiple time zones, sophisticated nomads actually turn that bug into a feature.
How does working a 12-hour time difference become a feature?
Through a follow-the-sun model. If you are a designer based in Asia, you can complete 8 hours of deep, uninterrupted work while your clients or team in North America are asleep. There are no pings. There is no telepressure. You upload your deliverables at the end of your day, and the client wakes up to finished work. Time zone differences, managed correctly, provide the ultimate shield against the very attentional residue you were warning about earlier.
Right. Well, let's follow that logic into the real world. You were saying that Starlink and asynchronous work models allow these highly paid professionals to bypass saturated cities and drop straight into remote, rural, underdeveloped regions. What happens to the local community when a cohort of Silicon Valley salaries suddenly drops into a rural village?
I think it opens up incredible opportunities for local economic stimulation.
See, the data on socioeconomic impact paints a much more extractive picture. What you are describing triggers massive geographic arbitrage.
Let's define that for the listener. You mean earning in a strong currency while living in a weaker one?
Exactly. They are earning strong US dollars or euros, but paying rent and buying groceries in local pesos or baht. That sounds like a brilliant life hack for the individual remote worker, but to the local barista or teacher who suddenly cannot afford rent in their own hometown, it looks like aggressive gentrification, and it is made worse by the fact that these nomads frequently operate in a gray market. A vast number of them enter on standard tourist visas, which legally do not permit local employment.
Well, because they aren't employed by local companies.
But they are consuming local resources. This creates a deeply parasitic dynamic. You have high-earning foreigners utilizing local infrastructure, driving up the cost of housing through short-term rental platforms like Airbnb, and straining local services without contributing a single cent to the public income tax base that funds that infrastructure. To frame these workers as bringing foreign direct investment to a local community is a fallacy if they remain entirely off the tax grid, isolated in their satellite-powered bubbles.
And that is a fair critique of how the movement started. But the problem of tourist visa abuse is exactly why the landscape is rapidly formalizing. We are past the Wild West phase. Right now, there are 64 countries offering dedicated digital nomad visas. This isn't a gray market anymore. Governments are actively competing to design legal, taxable frameworks to attract this specific demographic. And this brings us to the evolution of slowmadism.
Slowmadism meaning the slowing down of their travel frequency?
Yes, the frantic country-hopping backpacker with a laptop is becoming a thing of the past. Slowmads stay in one location for months, sometimes years. These new visa structures often provide pathways to permanent residency. And from an economic standpoint, slowmads behave entirely differently than tourists. Traditional tourists flood a location during peak season, cause massive congestion, and then vanish, leaving local businesses to starve in the off-season. Slowmads provide steady, predictable income year-round. They utilize platforms like Flatio to rent midterm housing directly from locals rather than relying exclusively on disruptive short-term tourist platforms that hollow out neighborhoods.
But does staying longer actually change the extractive nature of the financial disparity? I mean, a 6-month lease driven by a Silicon Valley salary still prices out the local family.
Getting smarter about how they capture that wealth. Look at Spain's Beckham Law.
Explain how the Beckham Law solves the tax gap.
Right, so the Beckham Law, originally created for David Beckham when he moved to play for Real Madrid, is a special tax regime that Spain has now adapted for remote workers and nomads. Normally, if you move to Spain, you get hit with a highly progressive tax rate that could take up to 45 or 50% of your global income. That discouraged high earners from legally registering. The Beckham framework allows foreigners moving to Spain to pay a flat tax rate around 24% only on the income they earn within Spain, or offers highly favorable rates on their global remote income for up to 6 years.
So it incentivizes them to step out of the gray market.
Exactly. The host country captures significant tax revenue that they previously wouldn't have seen at all, while the nomad receives legal clarity and residency. When governments design clear newcomer tax regimes like this, nomads become a powerful mechanism for knowledge diffusion. Co-working spaces become microclusters where global talent and local entrepreneurs mix, seeding new businesses and sharing skills.
Wait, let's pause on the idea of simple legal clarity. You are framing a digital nomad visa as a clean, simple fix. But the reality of international tax law is vastly more complicated, particularly regarding permanent establishment risk.
Ah, yes. Which terrifies corporate HR departments.
With good reason. Let's break down the mechanics of permanent establishment risk. If I am a software engineer for a tech firm based in Chicago, and I decide to get a digital nomad visa and work from Lisbon for 6 months, my physical presence in Portugal while doing my core job can trigger a corporate tax nexus. Suddenly, the Portuguese government can look at my Chicago-based company and say, you have an employee operating out of Portugal, which means you have a permanent establishment here. You now owe us corporate taxes on a portion of your global profits.
Because the employee's laptop effectively becomes a foreign branch of the company in the eyes of the local tax authority.
Exactly. How does my laptop suddenly make my entire company liable for Portuguese corporate taxes? Because global tax treaties were written for brick-and-mortar factories, not cloud computing. This massive compliance nightmare forces many nomads to remain in the shadows, actively hiding their IP addresses from their own HR departments so they don't get fired for exposing the company to millions in tax liabilities.
Yeah, it's an incredibly complex hurdle, I'll admit.
And even if a country waves a magic wand and fixes the corporate tax issue, a digital nomad visa might legalize a worker's presence, but it does not automatically generate cultural integration. We risk creating a two-tiered society, a globally mobile, wealthy elite who live above local constraints, and a geographically bound local underclass who exists merely to serve them their flat whites.
That risk exists, which is precisely why the mindset of the nomad matters just as much as the policy of the host country. The shift toward slow-madism isn't just about longer leases. It is fundamentally a shift toward mindful, responsible travel. You naturally bond with a country when you build a life there.
But do you have evidence of that happening at scale?
Actually, the source material highlights a fantastic example of nomads staying long-term in the Baja Desert in Mexico. Because they were invested in the area, because they weren't just passing through, they actively engaged in conservation efforts. They started eco-friendly initiatives, collaborated with local communities on sustainable fishing practices, helped reduce waste. By choosing longer leases, paying appropriate taxes under these new frameworks, and intentionally connecting with the local ecosystem, a nomad transitions from being a tourist to being a temporary citizen.
Okay, the Baja example is inspiring, but it feels like the exception that proves the rule. I remain deeply skeptical that individual good intentions can overcome systemic economic incentives. The structure of transnational remote work currently rewards geographic arbitrage. Until global tax frameworks and organizational compliance structures catch up to the reality of 18.5 million mobile workers, the ethical burden placed on the host community is simply too high. True integration requires learning the language, understanding local civic issues, and participating in the social fabric, not just, injecting foreign capital into real estate.
Well, let's pull back and look at the whole board here. If we summarize the landscape, my position is that the digital nomad movement is a permanent strategic shift in the global labor market. Yes, the early days were messy, but when managed with intellectual rigor, by implementing digital minimalism to protect cognitive health, utilizing formal international tax and visa compliance to benefit local economies, and embracing the mindful integration of slow-madism, this lifestyle is incredibly potent. It offers a mutually beneficial arrangement. The individual achieves genuine professional and geographic autonomy, and the host country benefits from year-round economic stimulation, foreign direct investment, and vital knowledge spillovers.
And my summary is that we cannot simply engineer away the profound human costs with a satellite dish and a time-blocking app. Until corporate organizations fundamentally redesign their expectations to eliminate the continuous partial attention of the always-on culture, the connectivity tax will continue to cause severe neurological and emotional burnout, heavily penalizing our most competent workers. Furthermore, until global tax structures adequately address the deep inequalities of privileged mobility and permanent establishment risk, this lifestyle risks remaining an extractive enterprise, one that quietly gentrifies host communities and strains local resources under the guise of borderless freedom.
I think where we absolutely find common ground is that the initial
ad hoc pandemic-era version of remote work is dead and buried.
Oh, absolutely. The Wild West phase of digital nomadism is over. The unexamined lifestyle is no longer sustainable, either for the human brain or the global economy.
Moving forward, intentional design is the only path, whether that means individuals and corporations strictly enforcing asynchronous communication rules to protect mental health, or governments formulating highly specific protective visa frameworks to channel foreign income into underdeveloped areas without displacing locals. The balancing act between our desire for global, seamless connectivity and the very real limits of human cognition and local infrastructure, well, it's going to define the next decade of labor.
It forces us to ask a difficult question about what we really value. The ability to be anywhere or the ability to truly be somewhere.
We leave it to you, the listener, to evaluate the mechanisms at play here. When that notification inevitably pings on your phone later today, we hope you'll think about that factory whistle and ask yourself what the true cost of your own digital freedom might be.
That wraps up today's journey. Thanks to my friends for sharing their thoughts, and to you for being part of this circle. Remember, inspiration isn't found once, it's built every day in small choices. If this talk spoke to you, share it, follow along, and let's keep the conversation alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.